Now, I don't know if it's like I'm going through the change or what's going on here, but I've asked Eddie Garrison now like 9 times if it's freezing in here or if it's just me. And Eddie, who is wearing, of course, is already naturally insulated, wearing 6 layers, says it's not chilly in here. But I think it is.
I don't think so. I actually think it's warm.
Well, yeah, you have the natural insulation and you've got on a full sweatshirt, right? You're wearing a hoodie. Maybe I'll put my coat on. But the reason I mention it is not just because there is somewhat of a chill in the air here in the studio, but it is a hot day in terms of news itself because we got a loaded one today, right? I thought that we were going to come in and talk primarily basketball today because we've got, obviously, Indiana up in East Lansing. You've got Purdue taking on Michigan. That's the big one. Purdue-Michigan's huge because, Purdue's been obviously the cream of the crop in the Big Ten and now seemingly just maintaining at that same level. Michigan's playing really well, and that one has huge implications, although Indiana, Michigan State does for those two teams. They're going to be scoreboard watching probably to see what happens there as well. And then obviously the Pacers in action tonight taking on the Knicks. Might see a new face that I've been pining for forever in the fold for Indiana. We'll see about that. And then also an all-star competition taking place here in Indianapolis in a couple of weeks, and one of the individuals that will be a part of that, Jalen Rose, will be here for it. Sean Johnson East will be here for it. One of the coaches that will be partaking in that is going to join us on the show. We'll let you know what I'm talking about coming up in just a bit. But we'll begin with the big news that I think probably a lot of people would anticipate that I would mention because of, my side hustle, if you will. But that is the news that has kind of been rumored about and speculated about for quite some time, truth be told. Within the paddock, which is a euphemism we use, meaning within the racing circles of IndyCar.
Now, what news is that, Jake?
That would be the news that Jay Fry, who joined IndyCar originally as the director of competition, coming from NASCAR some 7 years ago, and Jay Fry, who had been a NASCAR official, worked in a number of different ways within motorsports, came to IndyCar. I like Jay a great deal, and has been a good leader. And when he came to IndyCar and ultimately ascended to become the president of IndyCar, the NTT IndyCar Series, oversaw a lot of change. Oversaw the change of the end of the aero kits. If you remember the aero kits, those were essentially, for lack of a better phrase, the Lego pieces that went onto the car itself. He came to IndyCar in 2015, actually 10 years ago, as the competition director. So basically the head official, okay? Then in 2018 becomes the president of the series in general. And at that time you still had the aero kits, which were designed to be Lego pieces that could go on the car. I'm using that as a euphemism, to add downforce ingenuity and challenge for the cars. But one of the big problems with the aero kits was when a car would make contact or have a crash, there were pieces everywhere. And the cleanup was always kind of a nightmare. It was expensive for teams. I just don't think it necessarily went the direction that people anticipated. So as a result of that, when Jay Fry took over, that was one of the things that he did away with, was the manufacturer-specific, if you will, aero kits. Also, really worked tirelessly as a series in general to develop the aero screen. After the tragic accident, notably with Justin Wilson, where Justin Wilson was hit by debris, and they just determined, you know what, there's got to be a way to keep the drivers safer. And that was not the easiest thing in the world to do, because the aero screen that the drivers have now, the windshield, for lack of a better phrase, changes things in terms of the weight of the car, the aerodynamics of the car, and nonetheless, they worked tirelessly to come up with that. And there was a lot of speculation how that would go. And I think you would say how it went has been home run, because it has, on more than one occasion, there have been accidents where you look at it and say, man, that could have been different without the aero screen. The driver was protected there, and you kind of don't notice it, truth be told. I think a lot of people thought it was going to change the way the cars looked and whatever else, and once you get used to it and seeing it, you really don't notice the aero screen on there, and they've done their job. And then, of course, introducing hybrids, the hybrid technology that we saw last year as a start. That was the first step in getting in the hybrid engines. But with those changes, the announcement earlier today that Jay Fry now will step aside as the president of IndyCar, and in his place will be a guy that is very familiar in this area, no question about it, and somebody who has been a tireless cheerleader and leader for the series, and I say that in a good, not a bad way, and who has never, ever, ever met a stranger. And that's the thing that, truthfully, people love about Doug Bowles. Doug Bowles, who is the president of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, is now also the president of the NTT IndyCar Series and will assume that role immediately heading into the season. The season begins just a couple of weeks from now in St. Pete. And Doug will have, if you look at what he has done for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, just in terms of, always being one to advocate for the Speedway, to reach out to fans, to do what he can to get fans involved and engaged, and always making for the best fan experience that he can for the Speedway itself, and understanding and connecting to. I think the thing that people love about Doug Bowles with the Speedway is, I have always said, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, more than any sport or venue I think that there is, has this intimate connection with the fan base. And look, I take Notre Dame football, or the Pacers, the Colts, whatever it might be, Indiana basketball, Purdue football. We all are fans of those different teams. But I think the thing that makes the Indy 500 different is it does have this familial connection to people, where it's more than just the race itself, and it is the connection for a lot of people to things that are no longer around for them that they feel a part of. There are people that go to the Indy 500 because their grandpa introduced them to it, or they go to the Indy 500 because they remember the first time that Uncle Bob packed them into the car and took them down there, and it was their day away, with their uncle, whatever it might be. And people, because that track and that event and that month means so much to them nostalgically and emotionally. I think emotionally is the big thing. There is a peace that comes for people in knowing that the person who has the keys to it has that same understanding and appreciation. And Doug Bowles, who grew up on the west side, just outside of Indianapolis, and whose father was a judge over in Danville, and who's from the area, there is a great peace that people have of knowing that the keys are in the hands of somebody that has that same understanding of the sentimentality of the venue and the event. So now to have that for the series in general, I think it gives people a good feeling knowing that somebody who has the same passion for the sport and intimate knowledge of the sport, as opposed to, and Jay Fry did as well. I'm not saying Jay Fry, but if you were just to say, hey, you know what, here's a guy that's a tremendous marketer, and look what he's done for the UFC, and so we're going to put him in charge of IndyCar. Auto racing is just a different sport in the fact that it is very nuanced. So to have somebody who understands that nuance, I think people will greatly appreciate and enjoy. So congratulations to Doug Bowles, and at the same time, thank you to Jay Fry for his efforts. We can get into that more over the course of the show. But let's talk about what's going to happen tonight north of the Indiana-Michigan state line. Two big ones, and we'll begin with Purdue and Michigan. That game in general, when you look at it, Eddie, if I would have said to you in October, hey, pick the game just shy of Valentine's Day that you think is going to be for the lead or the driver's seat in the Big Ten Conference. And obviously Michigan State is right there as well. But in terms of two teams right now leading the conference or in really good position jockeying for it right now, I think we would have thought Purdue had a chance. Michigan is one that what Dusty May has done has been really remarkable. But, for this one tonight for Purdue, who, if you look at what Purdue has done, and I think a big part of Purdue's success has been not just Braden Smith, who I think is the best point guard in college basketball, and Trey Kaufman-Renn. but rather now starting to get everybody else to kind of understand their roles within it. And that includes, I think we thought Miles Colvin at the beginning of the year was going to be at the level right now that C.J. Cox has been in terms of a really good auxiliary piece, and then Caleb First as well. Everything just seems to have come together for Purdue a little bit.
Yes, Jake, it really has. And it took some time for Matt Painter and his coaching staff to get it figured out. Turns out who's playing in what role, but Jakari Harris and Caleb First have been critical to the success of Purdue the last handful of weeks, and it's shocking to me to see Purdue as an underdog in this game. Granted, it's 1.5, 2.5 points, depending on which book you have, but you can get plus odds on the money line for them tonight against Michigan. And if you're looking at it from a perspective of when these two teams last played, well, Purdue, they played on the 7th, and Michigan played on the 8th. And Michigan was on the road, Purdue was at home. So Purdue's had an extra day to kind of prepare and get ready for Michigan. I'm surprised that the Boilermakers are such a heavy underdog, especially with how this game went last time. Purdue just absolutely throttled them 91-64. They blitzed Michigan right off the start, and a large part of that because Michigan just could not buy a three-point basket. So I'm going to be interested to see how it is. Trey Kaufman-Wren named Big Ten Player of the Week for the third time this year, and I think Purdue has the pieces to beat Michigan again on the road and continue this winning streak because they are one hard team to beat, and you have to get them on a bad night, and I don't think tonight will be a bad night for them.
I think tonight a really important piece for Purdue is going to be, again, Caleb First. And I know that I've been I really talk up Caleb First because I have great admiration for his ability, and maybe it just speaks to the Purdue culture, buzzword as well, but First's ability to buy into what they need and the roles that he plays. But if you look at Michigan, Michigan is, and you don't see this a lot in college basketball today, and as a matter of fact, it's a challenging thing to do to be a team that has to rely on not one but two different and multiple bigs to score and work for you. But Michigan does it as well as anybody in terms of spacing them and getting the ball to positions down low, and Purdue, as a result of that, Kaufman-Wren, it's going to need more than just Kaufman-Wren down there, right, in terms of just defensively for what you want to do against Michigan. I thought Michigan was a little bit thrown off over the weekend when Indiana went to a zone on them because they want to get the ball inside, and then once Indiana went away from that, then they got back into that, and, Wolf had some late buckets, and Michigan, that's what Michigan wants to do. But Purdue has the personnel to be able to counter that. It's just a matter of keeping those guys on the floor, making sure they don't get in foul trouble, and then obviously your guard play. I think with Purdue you're going to get pretty good guard play. I mean, that's one thing
I think the key piece for Purdue tonight in terms of the outcome of this game will be Fletcher Lawyer, and you can make that case any night, but he had 18 points in that win against Michigan. He hasn't really had a great game, hasn't had a good game since in the last three, and he's the one guy I think who has a mismatch because Michigan doesn't really have the length to defend a guy like him. If he can, shot fake, dribble inside, get to the foul line or whatever a couple times tonight, I think it'll be all more important for Purdue because as we talk about with the Pacers sometimes of, getting those unaccounted for points, if you can get, 15 to 20 points or 20 to 30 between Fletcher Lawyer, Caleb First, CJ Cox, you name it, then it'll be super easy for Purdue to win.
What is the toughest place to play in the Big Ten? Who has the best home court advantage in the Big Ten? Might be Purdue. I mean, Mackey is very, very loud. There was a time you would have said maybe Indiana because I know people will say because of the way that Assembly Hall is built that when that crowd gets going, it's like they're just on top of you and you can feel the sound, if you will, coming down on you. But I think Michigan State might be the answer. For Indiana, it would be anytime you go to Wisconsin, it's a house of horrors. But I think Michigan State's a pretty tough place to play. Michigan is one that, to me, not unlike their football home field advantage, from the basketball standpoint for Michigan at Chrysler Arena, to me, it feels like kind of a quiet crowd, considering some of the teams that they've had there. But Michigan State, on the other hand, I think it's a really tough place to play. It can be really hostile. It goes without saying with that team and with that coach and Tom Izzo, it's tough. And it's a big one for Indiana tonight. This game tonight for Indiana might be as big for the other two that we just talked about as it is for Indiana because they would love to see Michigan State get handed a loss. But for the Hoosiers themselves, I mean, what are you playing for at this point? I'll give them credit. Against Michigan, I thought they played like a group that is still trying to salvage things, even though the year's over. I mean, it's over. You've got a coaching change at the end of the year. Who knows who on this roster is going to be back and who's not? Maybe some guys at this point are just simply playing for the transfer portal. Who knows? But we'll see what happens tonight with Michigan State. But Michigan State is one that's fascinating because they don't – you want to talk about balance. Like, they've got a very balanced roster. There's not a lot when you look at it. And this is a team that has, one loss since they played Maui? I mean, they've played unbelievably well, but there's not any one factor of – they can go 8-9 deep and hurt you in balance and in waves. Really big challenge for Indiana tonight. Would it surprise you if they come out and get rolled? Probably not. And maybe there was so much conversation going into the game against Michigan at Assembly Hall, so much conversation about that maybe that roster felt like they had to go out and defend themselves a little bit. Maybe that's what allowed them, because they did play well against Michigan, and they made adjustments against Michigan, which they haven't always made over the course of the season. But
let me ask you a question.
Yes.
When you watched that IU game against Michigan, when they made that run, did you notice the 5 players on the floor and who they were?
So I'm going to guess, the key would be this. I don't think Ballo and Renew were on the floor at the same time, correct?
Correct. They only went with Malik Renew. Now, the point I was about to make is the 5 guys that were on the floor, 4 of them were on this team last year. The only player that wasn't was Luke Goody. So they went with 4 returners and 1 transfer.
That's a really good point.
And those 5 players were playing their butts off and got IU back in the game.
I have, by the way, Eddie, and this will change 20 times, I'll admit it. Open disclaimer. I'll admit to you right now, what I'm about to say, I'm giving myself the pass of fluidity.
Okay.
Because you know what they say. Well, these situations are fluid. It's a fluid situation. It's ever-changing. I'm giving myself the pass of fluidity so that I can say to you in a week, well, it's fluid. And I'm going to go back and forth on this 20 times. But it's what we do. As I've thought about, and I have thought at pretty big length, I went back, and I appreciate Jeff Rabjohns coming on yesterday. The conversation's available on the podcast center at 1075thefan.com, where we went through candidates that Indiana will look at as their next head basketball coach. And I apologize to Purdue fans, and I apologize to Butler fans, and I apologize to Fighting Irish basketball fans, both of you, including Kevin Bowen. I apologize to Indiana State fans. The coaching search at Indiana and who their next coach is going to be a major topic for a while until we know who it's going to be. It just is. It is right now, and I read yesterday from a national standpoint. This wasn't a local story, nationally, saying Indiana has now vaulted themselves as the most desirable job or the biggest opening job in America. Most desirable, maybe not, but it's the king dog because of the NIL money, the facilities, and et cetera. And I did a radio hit yesterday in Kansas City where they asked me about Bruce Pearl. And I said, the thing about Bruce Pearl, I think for a long time he would have had interest in Indiana, but he's 65. And in addition to that, you have to wonder at this point, with the way he's got it rolling at Auburn, if he would leave there to come to Indiana. And the guy laughed and said, yeah, like you would ever hear Kansas or Kentucky or North Carolina say that a guy would rather be in Auburn. And I said, you're right. In 2005, you're correct. In 1995, you're correct. But even a Duke, there are certain jobs that I realize there is cachet to it. But in the era we're in now, it's less about the pedigree and the blue blood of it and more about how big is your NIL collective. And there's no coincidence. If you look at right now, the top 25 in college basketball, you look at the rankings, you look at the teams that are seeded as prospective number 1 seeds, whatever else. Who are they? Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Florida's had a good year. Texas Tech. It's schools that are used to putting together, now that it's legal, they know the money aspect of athletics in general, and their football schools primarily, but schools that have been in the marketing business of their programs forever. The NIL collectives and the way that you are able to now acquire players and entice them to come to your camp is totally different than the days of, do you want to come play where Branch McCracken coached? Do you want to come play where Fog Allen, beware the fog? Do you want to come play where you can watch highlights of Joe B. Hall leading, and Rick Pitino was once here? Look, different era now. But either way, with the Indiana search, you're going to see there are going to be names that are their main targets. We know that. And then if guys decline the job, or if guys take themselves out of the running, or if guys say, you know what, I'm happy where I am, or as Indiana does their homework and then rules people out, like we talked about with Rab Johns, in factoring in the possibility that a guy would come, the things that it would take to entice them, the situation where they currently sit, baggage they may bring, success they've had, age that may go against them or for them. Right now, I have the guy that I think, I'm not saying that I want, but that I think once all things get checked off, that in the end, when Indiana announces their hire, kind of like Tom Crean. Tom Crean wasn't the first name you heard when Tom Crean got hired. Archie Miller was. Tom Crean was not. Mike Woodson was not. So you knew that other guys had kind of fallen by the wayside, and then it's like, oh, well, you know what? Here's who they ended up with. I have the guy that I truly believe right now is the one that I would say is the clubhouse leader of, when all is said and done, this is the guy that I think would take the job and has the fewest things going against him taking it. Whether it be the situation that he's in is too good to pass up on, or there's baggage there, or his age, whatever. The guy right now that, when it's all said and done, that I think is the most likely that you would say Indiana has found their guy and it is blank. And people would go, okay, that's cool. He's a good coach. That's cool. And then they'd go, he's a good coach, but was he their first choice? And I'll tell you over the course of today who that guy is. And we got Pacers Knicks tonight at 7:30. We'll get into that as well. But whenever the Pacers and Knicks are playing, you know that means, like, there's something about it where it feels like the stars are out, right? It's a TNT game. You go back, you think about Reggie and Spike and everything else in the playoffs of last year. And speaking of all-stars, there's going to be a bunch of them in Central Indiana, including Jalen Rose, coming up in a couple of weeks. Why, you ask? We're going to talk to a guy that will answer that and tell us all about it next. Legator member Mena is not only a member of the company because she's been on Aquarian Company, but she's also, exactly what the song says, an all-star. The Pro Volleyball Federation All-Star Match is coming up on the 22nd. For those of you who are not keen at keeping score, that means it is a week from this weekend at the fabulous new Fishers Event Center. And joining us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line to talk about that and more, he just completed his, I believe, 23rd season as the volleyball coach at Purdue University, Dave Shondell, who is going to be part of this celebration of volleyball, joining us on the program. Coach, how are you?
Hey, Jake. Doing great, man. Always nice to talk to you.
Well, likewise, and I appreciate your time. I want to begin with this, man. I mean, you come from royalty of volleyball, right? I mean, and you come from an area where volleyball is huge, because we know in Indiana, when you think volleyball, you think about, Muncie, and for years I think that, facilitated obviously into collegiately at Ball State. Purdue then you were able to get great players from, say, Avon and some of the growing areas. But when I went out and saw the Indy Ignite for the first time, I realized just how popular this sport has become in Indiana. Now, am I late to the party here, or has this been a recent, let's say, in the last 10 to 20-year phenomenon of the travel circuit now translating into the professional level?
I think you've hit it on the head. The club sport of volleyball is just crazy. If you've been down in downtown Indianapolis when they host one of those tournaments, they take over the city. And I think that it's just been a process. It started slow, and as you know, my father, Dr. Don, was one of the pioneers in this sport. He was the guy at Ball State that started volleyball, and that kind of led at a teacher's college to lots of people going out and spreading the wealth. And so now we're seeing, I think, TV play a big impact on this as well. Now you can't, when I was growing up, even 20 years ago, you couldn't find volleyball on TV. Now you can't help but find a match on every night. So it's really a good thing. It's the most popular sport for women in the country. Volleyball is. It's the fastest growing sport for men.
And by the way, speaking of TV, Indianapolis will be showcased on television at 1:30 on the 22nd. That's a week from Saturday, because the Pro Volleyball and the Indy Ignite League, the league that they're in, the Pro Volleyball Federation, their all-star game is going to be broadcast on CBS Sports Network, national television for volleyball right here in central Indiana. Tickets available at provolleyball.com. The lineups will be announced in about 2 hours, but my understanding is the Ignite will have at minimum 3 players that are going to be involved in this. Coach, you're going to be involved. Jalen Rose will be there involved because he's a volleyball dad, if I'm not mistaken. Sean Johnson East, the gymnast, will be there as well. What will be your involvement with this All-Star Weekend?
Well, I've been honored to coach one of the teams, Jake, and I don't know what my roster looks like yet. That's still kind of in the works this afternoon, but they opted to bring in a couple of college coaches. Michelle Collier from Georgia Tech is coaching one team, and I get the opportunity to coach the second team. And I've been out to watch the Indy Ignite a couple of times play, and like you said, it is an event out there. I mean, it is a show. And the 3 players off of the Ignite that are on the roster are just amazing athletes. And your talk coming on about Legator, man, is she a freak? I mean, she may be the best athlete in the country playing volleyball right now. So Indy Ignite's got some great players, and 3 of them are going to be in this event on the 22nd. And I'm really looking forward to spending time with a lot of players I've coached against while I've been at Purdue University.
By the way, along with Legator member Mena, who we've had on the program, she's a hitter for the Indy Ignite. Joining her, Sydney Hilly and Azani Taylor are also going to be, Hilly is a setter, and then Azani Taylor, also a hitter, are going to be a part of this. Coach, this is probably going to sound like a really dumb question. Dave Shondell, the Purdue volleyball coach, is our guest. How has volleyball in the, let's say, 20 years, 23 years that you've been coaching it at the collegiate level, how has it evolved? And I know that sounds like such a dumb question, but I'm curious if you have seen it go from being a sport where girls were playing, and men, obviously, were playing just one, like any different position on the floor, to now having players becoming even more specified, or is it the other way around?
I don't think that either one of those ring a bell to me. I think that, over the last 25, 30 years, it's been a position sport. The one difference that we've made kind of in that time, probably 25 years ago, they added the libero,
Yep.
Libero, and that's a player that can come in and play back row all the time. You put your best ball control player, they wear a different colored jersey. I think that's made a big difference. I think the officials taking the whistle out of their mouth and putting it in their pocket has made a big difference. There are less calls being made now in the sport of volleyball, where it used to be anytime a ball came out of somebody's hands funny, the official wanted to blow the whistle. Now they've got rules in that are allowing more freedom of play, and I think that keeps rallies going longer, makes it more entertaining for the fans. I think that the game's going faster. They're trying to make sure the whistle's being blown to serve very quickly, so there's not a lot of standing around watching. Just a lot of things. But TV has introduced volleyball to America. And like I mentioned, years before you couldn't find a game on TV. Now you're watching it all the time. And when people start to learn about the sport and understand it, they begin to appreciate what these athletes are doing.
I liken it, and then, Coach, you tell me that this is the dumbest, neophyte comment ever. I liken the libero when I watch a volleyball match to the bishop in chess. It's like the one piece that can kind of go anywhere, and so as a result of that, kind of the curveball piece that can completely change the dynamic of like a rally or a set in volleyball. Now, am I way off base with that assessment?
No, the libero is a huge part of the game, and most teams won't serve at your libero. So if you've been given the assignment to serve in your rotation, your coach is going to not have you serve at libero, but yet they try to cover as much court as possible. Defensively, coaches will put that libero in the back row in a spot that their best hitter wants to attack the ball to. So they do have the freedom to play any of those three positions in the back row, left back, middle back, or right back. But if you don't have a good libero playing at the college level or the pro level or the high school level, you're in trouble. You're going to get beat.
The Pro Volleyball Federation All-Star Match is going to be on the 22nd at the Fishers Event Center. That is the home arena, of course, home stadium, whatever you want to call it, home gym for the Indy Ignite. ProVolleyball.com is where you can get tickets for this. Dave Shondell, who will be coaching for it and is the coach for Purdue Volleyball, joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Coach, I want to get back to simply this. This sport has meant so much to you. Your family has meant so much to the sport as well. What does it mean for you to be able to see volleyball at the highest level, not only just in terms of for the sport itself, but for young people that are just getting introduced to the sport, to see it on this level stage and played at the level that it's being played, and what that means for the growth in totality of all of it with the Ignite coming to Central Indiana?
Means everything to me and my family. We grew up, my dad was a pioneer, as I mentioned, in this sport. There was nothing he wanted to see more than volleyball get to this level. He passed away about 4 years ago, but he saw it coming. He could see what was happening in our sport. And, of course, my brother Steve is the winningest coach in the history of high school sports in this state. When he was at Muncie Burris, won 22, 23 state championships and just was ridiculous. And now my younger brother John is coaching on the Indy Ignite staff. He was a long time a member of my staff, and then he moved on to the Indy Ignite. And so he's a big piece of that. But I just hope people appreciate what these men and women have done before to get this sport to where it is right now. And the best thing about it, Jake, for me, is that our athletes now, these women, used to have to go across the ocean to go play volleyball. They were playing in Europe. They were playing in the Soviet Union. They were playing in South America. They were playing in Asia. Now they can play in America, and their families and their friends can come watch them play. And as you know, you walk into that Fishers Event Center, and it's a spectacle. They're doing a tremendous job of making volleyball fun, and people that go watch that first match, they'll walk out there saying, I'm coming back for more.
Well, there's just no downtime. I mean, to me, that was what most impressed me, Coach, was I went to it, And even when there is downtime on the court, which is not for very long, there's always something going on, right? I mean, it's literally like all senses are going, and they do a great job with that. And then the athleticism is on display. And I'm curious, from your standpoint as a coach, if someone came to you and said, Coach, I've got a player here that is just a flat-out athlete. They want to play volleyball. They don't know volleyball real well, but, man, are they athletic. They can run, jump. They're quick, lateral movement. That player would be best served at what position in volleyball?
I'd like to see him. I'd like to see some of those things that you're talking about first. But that's a front row player. That's an athlete. That's going to be probably either a middle attacker or a left side attacker. You can argue about what the most important position in the game is. The setter is the quarterback. The libero is kind of the middle linebacker. The outside hitters are the everything kind of a players. Maybe the power forward in basketball. So it just kind of depends. I'd have to have a little more information than that, but because every position now it's such an athletic sport. It didn't used to be that way. Now it's how high can you play above the net. One of the things I noticed with the Indy Ignite right now, they're probably the smallest team in this pro volleyball federation. They're small on the left side. They're a little small in the middle. The right side player, even though some of those guys play really big. But I think that's something that other teams are starting to now look at and attack them where they're small. And so I know that's something that George and his staff are looking at. How can they find a way to play larger in some of those positions? But I think it's an athletic game. So I think that no matter what position you have out there, you got to find an athlete to play it.
By the way, Ignite are at home coming up here on Thursday. They take on San Diego. Last thing, Coach, when you talk about exactly that, just in terms of the different areas, the front line obviously is where you like to have your athletes, if you will. What skill set in volleyball is the rarest? What is the one that you find is the hardest for a player or a developing player to grasp? And therefore, when you see somebody who can do that, you say that's somebody that's going to be around a long time.
Yeah, I think the easy answer for that is going to be arm swing. It's like, can you find a pitcher that can throw the ball 92 miles an hour? Can you find a left-handed pitcher that can throw it 90? And if you can find an athlete that can jump and has a cannon for an arm, then you've got something. You really have something. So that's when we're out at these tournaments watching these kids play. You can find the kids touching 10-4, 10-5, 10-6. So they're jumping above and reaching above a basketball rim by maybe a half foot. But can they hit a ball with pace? Can they adjust to a ball that's being set in the air? So a lot of it is just how, what's their size, what's their jump, and how good is their arm. And, I just want to encourage these people to come out and watch this Indy Ignite team, whether they get a chance to go to the All-Star game on the 22nd at 1:30. It's such a great venue. You just drive right into that place. It's smooth as silk getting in and getting out of that event center at Fishers. But if they haven't seen volleyball at this level, they're going to walk in on floor, fly, and they hit the ball with such power, and they're going to be really impressed. So I just encourage people to get a ticket, whether it's the All-Star game where Jalen Rose is going to be in there putting on a show and making it fun. To me, these pro teams have found out what they do in Mackey Arena. When you go to Mackey Arena and you watch Matt Painter's basketball team, it is an absolute show. And they've done a great job there, and that's what you're seeing at these pro volleyball sites now.
Again, next chance to see the Ignite will be at home Thursday. They take on San Diego at the Fishers Event Center at 7 o'clock. And then again, the 22nd is when you will have the Pro Volleyball Federation All-Star Match taking place, Fishers Event Center at 1:30. Going to be on CBS Sports Network. Tickets are available at provolleyball.com. Dave Shondell, it is only fitting that when volleyball is on the highest stage here in Central Indiana, that you would be a part of it and your family is well represented in it. Look forward to it, and I appreciate the time today. I guess I'll simply say boiler up, right?
I sincerely appreciate those sentiments, Jake. And last question. Boilermakers at Michigan tonight. What do you got?
Hey, listen, you mentioned Matt, and Dusty May's done a heck of a job in Michigan.
Yeah, he's great.
And we talked about it earlier and how that, that's a big-time matchup. But Like I said, if Caleb First and C.J. Cox are able to do the facilitating that they've been able to do in the auxiliary role, we know Braden Smith's the best point guard in basketball, period, in my opinion.
Yep.
And Trey Kaufman-Wren's been great.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go against Matt Painter. I like Dusty May and the job he's done, but I'll take the Boilers, especially because I'm talking to you. I'll take the Boilers, right?
Well, I appreciate that. I wish we wouldn't have beat the pants off them the last time we played them.
That's what Eddie said. That's what Eddie said, right?
I'm not liking that too well, but I'm glad First is playing well because we need First and Trey to match up against their two big fellas to be able to have a chance. But it'll be a great game.
Yeah, Michigan's unique in the fact that they've got not one but two really good bigs, and they work well really together, good. Right? So
yeah, they're fun to watch.
Either way, it'll be a well-coached game. I know that much.
Yeah. All right, thanks, Jake.
Appreciate it, Coach. Dave Shondell joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. We come back, by the way. You said Holder's in for today, Eddie?
Yes.
Stephen Holder at 1 o'clock, is that right?
Yes.
Because the legal tampering period is about to open up. And I don't know what legal tampering means. That's an oxymoron. Doesn't tampering mean doing something you're not supposed to in a time period where you're not supposed to do it? So how can you legally be tampering with somebody? But we're going to talk to Stephen about what players the Colts might legally tamper with or who may legally tamper with theirs. But when we come back, I mentioned it, the coaching search, and the guy that I keep going back to for Indiana and saying when you size up the demerits and the pros of each coach, this is one that I have the hardest time knocking off the list. And it wouldn't surprise me if it ends up being him. But I'm giving myself the flexibility of fluidity. But I'll tell you who I'm thinking of next. Pacers Knicks tonight at the Fieldhouse, 7:30 tip, because it's a nationally televised game, FYI. So what I was thinking about last night at about 2:38 in the morning, laying there, and I was thinking about our conversation with Jeff Rabjohns and the different coaching candidates for Indiana. And oftentimes when coaches get hired for a job, you know, they know, everybody knows, like, okay, that wasn't their first choice. But you're like, okay, I mean, they save face. It's not a bad hire. Very seldomly does a coach or does a school just say, hey, we made a change. And then you go, well, now I understand why they made a change. That was a slam dunk. Fred Glass, when he made the move from Tom Crean, made it because he thought Archie Miller was going to be there for 30 years. And he was like, this is a slam dunk hire. And Fred Glass is not a fool for that thought. I mean, the vast majority of people thought that, and it was universally accepted as a complete home run. It was his finest hour to make that move and to go get him and pick his guy and go get him, and boom, done. And it just didn't work out. Obviously, Brad Stevens is target 1, 2, and 3. Everyone knows this. And Dusty May is the next call. Everyone knows this. But after that, you get into the names that we've discussed. Bruce Pearl would be a huge hire, but he's 65 years old, making a ton of money at Auburn. Would he leave Auburn at this point? And if he comes in, and he's probably going to win right away, but you're back to square one within a couple of years because he's 65 years old. I mean, what's he going to coach till he's maybe 74, 75, maybe? Ben McCollum at Drake, who I've talked about. Like him a lot. But they can't afford to run the risk that he is Archie Miller and that you didn't have a big enough sample size. Same can be said for that matter, Josh Schertz, even though I think he's a great coach. But do you know at this point that he is going to be a long-term, that's the answer guy? I don't know that you do. For each coach that comes up, when you start to tell yourself that it looks like a can't miss, then you can find a reason why there is the pitch is coming at you like a knuckleball. You know, there's a chance for a swing and a miss. TJ Otzelberger at Iowa State done a really good job. No question about it. No, and looks like a really, really good, solid option. Done a really good job. But again, fairly young. Do you have enough body work? I think you probably do, but didn't exactly set the world afire at UNLV, went under 500 at UNLV, but was only there for 2 years and inherited a tough situation. Had good success at South Dakota State. But does that equate to the Big Ten? I don't know. Each coach you can find a plus and a minus. There is one guy that I keep going back to, and I don't think it'd be a home run. I don't think people would do backflips. And I don't think he'd necessarily win the press conference because people wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, I am so in on this guy. Crean and Crimson, print the T-shirts like they did for Tom Crean. But where he is currently, he absolutely, every chance he gets, looks like a guy that is desperate for someone to get him out of the situation. And maybe that's the one demerit, is this guy might just be perpetually unhappy. I don't know. But he's won for a long time. He's won at multiple places. He's been in the Midwest. He's recruited in the Midwest. He's been to a Final Four. He's had winning seasons virtually every time, and his teams guard and play hard. I don't think that it's a very exciting style of play, but I think it would win. And he knows the conference, but seemingly at the place that he is in the conference, would love to get out. And you'd think I'm going to say Chris Collins because I've been on Chris Collins as somebody that I favor from day one. But it feels to me like in the end, if Indiana doesn't get the answer they're looking for in their first 2 phone calls, that once they go through the process and sift through everything, that Mick Cronin is a guy that could end up with the job.
That's where I thought you were going. Once you started talking, I was like, yeah.
It just feels that way. I don't know that anybody would be blown away by it, but in 3 years when Indiana's 28-5, they'd be like, okay, it's cool. I get it.
Good news for him is that he wouldn't have to travel so much.
That's what I mean. Like, right now, anytime he opens a mic in UCLA, he's like, can we talk about how absurd this is out here? It's ridiculous. It's tough, right? Stephen Holder going to join us other side, figure out what legal tampering is. 1 o'clock hour is underway in Indianapolis. For that matter, the 1 o'clock hour is underway everywhere in the Eastern time zone. My name is Jake Query. Eddie Garrison is the guy manning the controls and selecting the halftime music. That would be Kendrick Lamar, who is playing. Joining us now in the Express Pro Tire Auto Guest Line, a guy that I believe, based on his social media, enjoyed what for some reason was a polarizing halftime show, even though I enjoyed it as well. Stephen Holder from ESPN.com joining us on the program. A fair assessment, Stephen, in your interpretation of the halftime show, correct?
Oh, yeah. I'm a big Kendrick Lamar guy, so yes.
Now, here's what I was saying. And when I was watching it, I was like, you know what? So I'm not as a follower of rap like I was when I was in my early to mid 20s, but as you know, because you and I have talked about it many a time, I mean, I loved every single aspect of it when I was in my early to mid 20s. And so then I had to remind myself what I would have thought if Too Short or, Ice Cube or the DOC was doing a halftime show in 1991. I'd have been all about it, man. And I just had to realize that it's probably not my target demo, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So a couple things. No, you're not the target demo. I mean, hell, I'm barely the target demo, right? I mean,
right.
I'm getting to that age. We both are. But I would say this. I think it's a couple things. Number one, the NFL, what are they trying to do? They're ultimately a business, okay? And I said this on J&V yesterday. I think it's worth repeating. Like, they know their biggest challenge, as much of a 800-pound gorilla as the NFL is, their biggest challenge in the next 10 years is going to be getting kids, younger generation, to give a damn about football, because they don't watch sports in the way that you and I did growing up. Just judging from my own kids. Even,
and I don't know that they play it, right? And I know that sounds crazy, but the numbers in terms of participation of football are not what they were 15 years ago, correct?
Right. And then you also think about this, like just viewership. Think about the viewership experience now versus what it was 20 years ago. I mean, I can tell you every big game that I watched growing up, I was on the edge of my seat. I can tell you everything that happened. And even now, even me at my age, I sit there with my phone and I'm looking down half the time, and it's a different viewership experience. So anyway, I think that is a small perhaps, but a part of the reason the NFL is going this way. You see, they're not going with the over-the-hill rockers anymore, rock groups, right? They did that for like 10 years straight, and that has been basically discarded. Obviously, Jay-Z is in charge of the production of the halftime show, so obviously the genres and the approach would change, but I'm just telling you, I do think the NFL is willfully going a different direction, in part because of that. The other last thing I'll say real quick is this. I know that's not what people care about. That's not the foremost thing people care about. But this last point I want to make. The thing that I think is great about Kendrick Lamar is that he is not going to adjust based on his audience. He's going to be like, I am me, and you're going to get me. And if you get it, you get it. If you don't get it, then this wasn't for you. And now that might not work for everybody, but I admire it to a degree, because I'm like, you know what? It's much easier to adapt as an artist and to play to the larger audience and do what the labels want you to do and all that. And Kendrick Lamar's like, I don't care. And it's worked, which I think is amazing, right? He's done it his way, and I think that's great.
But the one thing he did do, Stephen, I think I'm correct in this, he did conform it, though, to a mainstream network television safe performance. In other words, it wasn't they didn't have to mute him the whole time. You know what I mean? So, but he got his subliminal. It was very intellectual, right?
Yeah, that's a non-negotiable anyway, right? With the NFL, I mean, Snoop Dogg and Dre had to do that a couple of years ago, which I was wondering whether that would be possible, and they did it. They did it pretty well, I guess. I think the thing with Kendrick, I would say, is that Yeah, I mean, does he have F-bombs in his music, and does he have language? Yeah, I mean, he's a West Coast rapper, right? But that is not they're not gratuitous, right? I think he's trying to say something, and if you've not listened to his debut, was it LP, EP? What's the full record?
LP,
full album?
No, EP,
Yeah.
extended play, right?
All right, okay. So if you've not listened to his first one, because he's got some other shorter, releases before that, but his 2012 Good Kid, Mad City, that was what he won the Pulitzer for, and it is, I think, the closest thing to a movie you will hear in an album form. It is unbelievable. So anyway, lots of deep meanings and lessons and all that. I mean, it was like watching Boys in the Hood again. So I'll say that.
Boys in the Hood, man. Every time I get a scratch-off lottery ticket, I just think to myself, come on, man.
Exactly.
Right? If you know, you know. Stephen Holder joins us. What's that?
That duck.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Stephen Holder on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line from ESPN.com. All right, Stephen, we are getting ready to enter into and I'm very curious of this. First off, can you define for me, please, what the legal tampering period is?
Yeah, I mean, it starts, first off, and I guess we're about a month out or so. The legal tampering period, it should be about a 3-day period, I believe it will be this year. It usually starts on a Monday, ends on Wednesday. And the way that works is you are allowed to enter into negotiations. Other teams can enter into negotiations with players' agents, players who are going to be free agents as of the start of the new NFL league year. So that new year kicks off. I don't have the dates in front of me, but it's going to be in mid-March, I think. Let's say.
I think it's March. I think it may be March 4th. Hang on. The deadline for the franchise transition tag is March 4th, right?
It should be the week after that.
And then immediately following, would be the legal tampering period. Yeah.
So the start of that following week, which around the 10th or so, that will be the legal tampering period. So that is that's the period in which, for example, the Colts last season or last spring were talking to Daniil Hunter, you might recall, and then they did not consummate that deal, and within a matter of hours, he moved on and did strike a deal with Houston. Now you can't sign the deal until the actual signing period begins, which is a couple of days later. But you can agree to terms on those deals. It's an interesting time though, because nothing is signed, and every blue moon something does fall apart. And so you might recall, I don't know, it's probably been about 10 years now or more than that. Frank Gore had a deal with the Philadelphia Eagles and backed out of that deal. And I'm trying to remember, it might be when he came to the Colts.
I do remember that. I think that's right. Yeah.
So anyway, that's an aside, but it's not binding, but you can enter into negotiations. And I think that's going to be a very interesting time for the Colts. I mean, we have been sitting here and have been told that they're going to take a different approach to this offseason, and that will be our first indication that they'll actually see that through.
Now, Stephen, here's the thing, and you know that I don't know if you know this or not, I suffer from what's called neuroticism, okay? Where
it's a big word.
Thank you. Well, what was the one you used last week, and people were still asking me about it? Yeah.
I forget.
So here's the thing. I looked this up because I'm neurotic, okay? The definition of tamper is to interfere with something in order to cause damage or make unauthorized alterations. Now, if it's legal, then it's not unauthorized. So this is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as legal tampering, right?
It's a stupid name. I totally agree. There has to be a better way to define this or refer to this. I agree with you because, I mean, tampering can get you in big trouble in the NFL, right? They can take draft picks from you.
Correct.
So it's like, hey,
because it's unauthorized.
Go for it.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah.
So, okay. Stephen, in the Super Bowl itself, if you are Chris Ballard watching that Super Bowl and you are comparing it to your team, your takeaway is what?
So the thing that struck me, the thing that we probably didn't talk about enough coming out of that game, is the pass rush from the Philadelphia Eagles. Because to Chris Ballard's credit, he was trying to build that. It was not successful, or has not been successful to date. They've had some success, but nothing like that, right? So I think he was onto something there, but you didn't execute. And so the two times that the Patrick Mahomes has been beaten in the Super Bowl, they have both played out similarly. And it's that the defense was all over him and smothered him. Tampa Bay did it, and certainly Sunday night, the Eagles did it. So this is a very obvious blueprint, and I think you can apply that to the other elite quarterbacks in the NFL. That is really what it boils down to. The Eagles did not have the best quarterback on the field that night. I mean, in general, like, they did not have the best quarterback entering that game. Now, Hurts played better, but he played better because he was in a better situation, perhaps, right? Mahomes could not be Mahomes because they didn't allow him to. That's how you got to beat these elite quarterbacks. Look, the Colts are in the AFC. They got to find a way to smother these quarterbacks up front. And then you sort of lessen the importance of all the other variables. Maybe your quarterback doesn't have to be as elite, and maybe you don't have to, go out and have 400 yards of offense. I mean, that is what it boils down to. Can you contain these quarterbacks? And the Eagles did it, and that is the reason they got the trophy, in my view.
You know what's so funny, Stephen? In watching the Super Bowl, and he wasn't even necessarily the primary player defensively for Philadelphia, but he's really good. Do you remember when Carter was coming out of Georgia? What was the issue?
Oh, yeah.
Do you recall? Was it
he had that drag racing incident, or alleged drag racing incident, in which it resulted in an accident, and I believe at least one person was killed.
I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty bad, right?
And I'm not making light of that or that person's passing at all, right?
Yeah.
But he dropped, and he didn't drop a lot. I mean, but there were people that thought he was going to be the first player picked in the draft. He fell.
Well, he dropped pretty significantly for the player that he was.
That's what I mean.
Right?
I think he went 9 or 10 or something like that. But my point being, and I want to make very clear, I'm not endorsing that tragedy at all, okay?
Certainly.
But when it comes down to it, Warren Sapp comes to mind. Remember Randy Moss? Everybody.
Yeah.
We got to make a statement here. We're not going to draft Randy Moss because we believe in character in this building. And every franchise says it. Every franchise says we got character. This is the guy that he's just When it comes down to it, during the Super Bowl, I didn't hear a mention about any player's character and clean background.
Yeah.
You can play or you can't, right? And like in the end, I want guys that can play.
It's a great point. Like, I think that Carter is an interesting one, right? I mean, I think there were people that were on opposite sides of the spectrum on that. They were all over the map. It's like, some people were like, no, this is outrageous. This guy should pay a price. And then there were others like, all right, he did a stupid thing. He didn't willfully commit a crime to hurt someone. He did something stupid, and it had a terrible result. I probably lean more toward that way, but I'm not diminishing it. But that's just the reality of it, right? I mean, he did something insanely stupid, and the result was catastrophic. What does it say about his character? I don't know. It may say not much, frankly. I don't know. I would say this. You mentioned Warren Sapp. I mean, he's a great example. Is Warren Sapp a good human being? No. Okay? He is not a good human being. And you know what? None other than Tony Dungy said, I want that guy. Tony told me the story once. In fact, it's a great story. He remembers distinctly being at the Combine, and I think he was with the Vikings still. I think he was the Minnesota Vikings defensive coordinator when Sapp came out. And Tony told me the story of being at the Combine and watching him and thinking, I don't care. I want that guy. So he didn't get him, but then he became the coach in Tampa Bay a couple of years later and did get him. So that did work out. But, look, again, Tony Dungy, who wears his faith on his sleeve and what he stands for, and yet that guy was the driving force behind his defense. You know, the guy who's been accused of everything under the sun and had, you know, cocaine use allegations when he dropped in the draft. I mean, all that, right? So I'm with you, man. I agree to a degree that you have to prioritize character generally. But I think if you're going to make an exception, make it for the absolute most elite players because it's worth it.
Stephen, I was talking about this earlier. Stephen Holder's our guest from ESPN.com. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. You know, everybody knows. I mean, I've talked about it on the air. You know, I'm a Clemson football fan. That's the college team that I follow and root for, right? Yeah. And I remember in January of 20, Clemson, who was playing in their, gosh, I got to think off the top of my head here, fourth national title game in like a 6 or 7 year stretch, something like that. And they go up against LSU, and the roof caves in, and LSU blows them out of the building. And it broke Clemson. They've never been the same since. They're still a good program, but they've never gotten back to that level. Is there any chance that Philadelphia broke Kansas City?
Well, first of all, has Dabo heard of the transfer portal yet?
Hey, they got a guy from this year. They got a transfer. They got a big one from Alabama.
I'm just saying, you're Clemson. You know, some guys might actually want to come there. Interesting thought. I don't know. That's a great question. You know what? We've never seen the Chiefs like this. That's the funny thing. We've seen them lose in the AFC Championship once, but I mean that was a down to the wire game against Joe Burrow, who had the game of his life, an incredible defensive performance from the Bengals. We've never seen the Chiefs just get obliterated like this on that stage. That was foreign to all of us because we've never seen it. And I think that is going to be the story of the offseason. You know, what version of the Chiefs do we get, and how do they respond to this, both on the field and also in the offseason? You know, do they retool their team at all? And what does that look like? I think it's going to be fascinating because they have been content to just keep it rolling. It's like, all right, we got 15 and we got Chris Jones and you know, Kelsey's hanging on still. And everybody else, we'll just kind of cycle through those guys and we'll make it work. And this year that wasn't enough. And so I don't know. It'll be interesting. And I would say when you really think about it, this version of the Chiefs, even though they had a spectacular regular season record, the eye test told you this team wasn't as good, right? I mean, I think we said it all year. It felt stupid saying it because they kept winning. But your eyes weren't lying to you. They weren't as good. And so now that has been reinforced. So I can't wait to see what they do. I will tell you this, Mahomes is not going to be shaken by it. If anything, he's going to be just more determined because that's just kind of how he's wired. But he can't do it by himself. And I'm very interested to see how the Chiefs respond on the field and both off the field in terms of constructing their team.
Okay, Stephen, every year at the end of the Super Bowl, here's what I do. This is wild and crazy. I mean, let me tell you something.
Okay.
But I take $16, okay? $16. And that $16, I put it into one of the apps, okay? I won't say which one here. I don't want to show any favoritism. And I put $2 on each to win next year's Super Bowl.
Right.
Okay? So I'm going to give you the teams that I put the $2 on, and then I want you to tell me which one gives me the best chance of actually winning.
Okay.
Okay? Now, I'm going to take two of them out of the equation here because I did do Buffalo and Detroit just because that would get me my money back. So those are obviously, pretty good contenders, right? Yeah. So then I'm going to give you the others, and you tell me which one you think gives me the best chance. Chargers, Niners, Dolphins, Broncos, Steelers, Colts.
Okay, try me again. Chargers, Niners, Broncos?
Niners, Dolphins, Broncos, Steelers, Colts.
Man. That's a tough one. First of all, I don't think any of those teams are winning it next year. But I'd say,
Denver?
That's, man. That's a great point. I don't know. I don't know that the Niners feel like they're going in the wrong direction.
I would agree. Doesn't it feel like McCaffrey might have hit the ceiling? And I don't mean that from a just health standpoint and everything else, right?
Right. I mean, Devo wants to be traded. They did have a lot of injuries this year, so I hesitate to overreact. They have the most talent of all the teams you mentioned. They just do, but. So I hesitate to overlook them. I just don't know if they can put it together. They were a mess this year. But you know what though? I don't trust the other teams though. I don't trust them. I think the Broncos. Look, Bo Nix had a great year, but is Bo Nix going to go toe to toe and go beat Joe Burrow and someone like that in the playoffs? Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. I say no. So maybe I do go back to the Niners. The Dolphins. I think that ship has sailed. I just do. The Steelers.
Did the Dolphins ship ever leave the harbor?
Not really. Not really. You're right. They got to the playoffs a couple times and then did what? Nothing. Literally nothing. Right. So they're right. The ship. They never pulled the anchor up. I just the Steelers. Look, they're interesting. I don't know what the quarterback situation looks like, but I would say the quarterback situation will not be significantly better next year.
Okay, how about this?
Yes.
Over under for next year. I'm going to put the number at 4. Okay. Over under number of games Aaron Rodgers starts as an NFL quarterback next season. Over under a 4. Oh my God.
The over under is 4. You said.
Yep. Do we now have enough body of work, Stephen, to say that Aaron Rodgers, while an incredible talent, who is coming off statistically a very good season, that it seems now almost indisputable that he basically is just a complete pain in the backside, and therefore that's why he's a free agent again?
Well, look, that was evident 5 years ago. Okay. The Packers spent every offseason begging him on their knees to play. Please come back and take our money, Aaron Rodgers. And he would say, "Oh, I don't know if I like you anymore." He enjoyed it, the guy. Look, I'm not going to psychoanalyze him, but it just smacks of like, dude, how big is your ego? Just how big is your ego? And clearly he wanted to play. He's still playing 5 years later. So it was all just like
at a high level. High level. But again, you look at Pittsburgh and Minnesota. One of those two is going to give him a shot, right?
I don't know about Minnesota. I say no. I say Minnesota sticks with one of the quarterbacks they have already. That makes too much sense. Now, Pittsburgh, that's interesting. That is interesting. I hadn't given that a lot of thought, but –
Or the Raiders.
Well, that's certainly possible. I just think that here's the thing, though. But here's what's happened. Each of the last few years, he's proven, even though he's played well, he's been more trouble than he's been worth.
Oh, totally. Are you kidding me?
And that's the thing. His teams haven't done anything. So, okay, yeah, you got a competitive quarterback, but, it hasn't gotten him anything. The Jets went out there and got him everybody he wanted, including Davante Adams, and did what? They have nothing to show for it. Now, granted, they have a messy organization, and there's lots of issues there. But a lot of them trace back to him because they did everything that he wanted. So he's a worse general manager than LeBron James. Okay, that's for sure. Like, we know that those two guys have a lot of say in what their teams do. Well, LeBron, who maybe isn't the best executive, but he's definitely better than Aaron Rodgers. Okay, I would say that. And I just don't know, man. I wonder if this is going to be a rude awakening for him, where he doesn't get the reception that he wants, because Aaron Rodgers wants to be loved. And I don't know who loves Aaron Rodgers right now. And I'm very interested to see how this plays out, because
I can tell you one person that absolutely loves him.
Who's that?
Aaron Rodgers.
Oh.
But you know what? I'm cool with that, because I love me some me. So you know what? I'm cool with that, Stephen. I'm definitely cool with that. All right, legal tampering begins here coming up. What do we say, like March 8th, something like that? So a couple of weeks here, about 3 weeks before legal tampering gets underway, and then the Colts will start seeing A, who comes calling for their guys, and B, whose guys they go calling for. We'll have it all discussed, and, of course, Stephen will have all the coverage at ESPN.com. Appreciate it, Stephen.
All right, you got it.
All right, Stephen Holder on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. We come back, we'll get back into what happens tonight at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. Big, bad, evil empires in town. Talking about the New York Knicks. Preview next. Pacers Knicks at the Fieldhouse tonight. We'll get into that in just a little bit here as Indiana has a new face that's going to be on the floor that I've been talking about for like a year, pining for it, asking why it hasn't happened. Now it finally apparently will tonight. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But before we do so, I want to talk a little college hoop. Purdue and Michigan in action tonight up at Chrysler Arena in Ann Arbor. Now, Eddie, I mentioned yesterday that I was watching the movie Grease over the weekend.
I'm familiar with the movie.
Isn't Greece? What's the name of the high school in Greece?
Rydell High School.
Mm-hmm. That'd be Rydell High School, right?
Yep.
Now it's Bobby Riddell, who's Bobby Buckets, who is, of course, going to be on the radio analysis alongside Rob Blackman. He and I have that in common. We have done broadcasts with Rob Blackman on the radio. Bobby joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line to talk about Purdue and Michigan. Bobby, let's get right to this. Michigan, to me, is intriguing because they are a team that effectively uses two bigs down low. That, to me, means it's going to be important. Trey Kaufman-Renn, we know his importance. But Caleb First has really, I think, played well in terms of understanding exactly when his role, when it's go time and when it's not, if that makes sense for Purdue. Is he going to be tonight's most important player defensively for Purdue, along with Kaufman-Renn?
Hey, Jake. First off, thanks for having me on. And before we get into the X's and O's of Michigan, we got to talk a little Rydell High at Greece first, because I definitely got that all the time growing up, of course, because, as you said, last name is pronounced Riddell. But, of course, a lot of people would pronounce it Rydell from time to time.
Now, my understanding, but Rydell High was with a Y, correct?
Correct, yes. So it was spelled Rydell. But, yeah, I got Riddle, I got Rydell, I got Riddell. I got it all growing up. But, yeah, the Rydell High from Greece reference was certainly there all the time growing up. So, yeah, that was funny you brought that up. But, yes, on to more important things, the Wolverines and Boilers tonight. Yeah, certainly, like you said, because of Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf, the two 7-footers that Michigan has, fantastic front court players, the Caleb First and Trey Kaufman-Renn dynamic is certainly huge. And both those guys being, a similar size, pretty good foot speed in the front court, versatile defenders in their own right, makes them a pretty good matchup for us as far as trying to guard those guys. I think we, saw that in Mackey Arena the first time around. Those guys, because they're relatively interchangeable, can guard multiple different positions. Not quite as big as Golden and Wolf, but pretty good physical guys in their own right. Definitely make them huge pieces. And, yeah, Caleb First, going to be pivotal. His ability to guard 1 through 5 is huge for us. He can switch on the perimeter onto some of Michigan's guards if need be. Because of his foot speed at that size, we can just do so many different things with him, and that's really what's helped complement our team. And then his ability to rebound, really is added to that defense. One of our top steals guys as well, since he's been playing more minutes. And they're going to be huge, right, to see who of those front court pieces for both teams are able to avoid foul trouble, just because it feels like both teams have some solid backup big guys, but, the starting group for both teams are going to be really impactful.
I've talked about the following situation a lot with Tyrese Halliburton for the Pacers, and that is when the ball is in his hands, it seems to me like Halliburton, when he's aggressive offensively, that then facilitates for him to be a distributor. And I think sometimes guys want to distribute first and then become aggressive offensively later. Braden Smith is a guy that can do both. He can obviously facilitate, but he can also get his own shots, and he can score. He is a better player, Braden Smith, when he does which first? Plays a little bit selfishly and lets that then open things up, or opens up for others, and then that opens up for him to be selfish?
It's a great question, and I think, sometimes it very much is, it depends on what the defense is doing, right? Like if the defense is, playing a certain defense that's allowing him more open looks, I think if he's being passive, that's where it can hurt us. And sometimes that's been the case throughout his career. Is he's been, like a lot of players, if they see some early shots go in, they're naturally going to stay more aggressive, stay on the hunt for field goal attempts. Whereas then if you miss some early shots that you're capable of making, I think he has had a tendency at times maybe get down on himself from a shooting standpoint throughout his career, and then maybe he gets less aggressive to shoot the ball, and then maybe passes up some shots that the defense is giving him because he's trying to be more unselfish and facilitate. And so I think sometimes it's interesting with him because if he makes some shots early, then he stays uber aggressive and then puts a ton of pressure on the defense to have to account for him. And, we saw that at Iowa where, he made some shots and then all of a sudden it just becomes so difficult to handle because now you really are put in a tough spot because he's going to take any open shot he gets, shoot it with confidence. And then if you overreact to that or try to scheme him, take away Braden from a shot standpoint, he's such a good facilitator and very unselfish that he'll make the right play. So I like when he's being aggressive, hunting his shot. I just think, he's such an elite shooter off the dribble that, he puts such a stress on the defense because he can get his shot off pretty much at any time. He's really good in the mid-range. He definitely is more comfortable, I think, shooting the mid-ranges than, even the threes. He obviously is a very good three-point shooter, but I would even like to see him shoot more threes, honestly. But, yeah, I like when he's hunting his shot. I think that's when he's at his best, and then it just opens up the whole offensive playbook for Purdue.
Did you expect to see and I mean this not as a knock on him because he's been a good player, but at this point in the year, did you think that Miles Colvin would be a heavier in rotation guy than he has been to this point?
Yeah, that was interesting. I think a lot of people, and understandably so, expected Miles and Cam to have pretty big roles this year, and I certainly did as well after.
And Heidi as well, correct.
Yeah, just considering how well those guys played in the NCAA tournament last year, they played really nice roles for us, and you just kind of expect, okay, that freshman to sophomore leap is likely to happen, and I still think they have gotten better, but it is just it's an interesting thing when you think about both those guys. They played so well off of Zach last year, being guys who could be spot up shooters, but also good cutters and using their athleticism. I think this year, without Zach, they've had to play different roles. Cam Heidi in particular is someone who played a wing position last year and now has played more of a power forward position. And then with Miles, trying to fill that Lance Jones spot that was vacated, he's just a different player than Lance was. And I think we've seen with C.J. Cox and Jakari Harris playing a little bit more lately, especially with C.J. in the starting lineup. Those guys are more of a Lance Jones type of player as far as skill set goes. And so sometimes it's more of just, fit with Purdue's personnel and the scheme we're running. And I do think, even though Miles has certainly had nice moments, and it's tough when your shot's not falling like it's been for Miles and Cam lately, it's tough to get, a ton of minutes, right? Because shot makers got to make shots, and coach is going to try to play the guys, more minutes as far as guys who are making shots. And, also I just think, having that extra ball handler out there alongside Braden and Fletcher, which is what CJ has provided, has been so beneficial.
Our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line is the color analyst on the Purdue Radio Network for the Boilermakers, Bobby Riddell. Bobby, has Trey Kaufman-Renn had to kind of readjust the expectation of himself? And by that I mean, with Zach Edey gone, I think at the beginning of the year people thought, well, they're just going to put in Trey Kaufman-Renn because he's a veteran guy and a big-time recruit and just go through him. And then it almost seemed like everybody kind of had to taper that a little bit and adjust, and that's allowed him now to really now be the guy that we thought in the beginning he was going to be, but it's happened slower and more organically. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say, in terms of his comfort level over the course of the year?
No, I think that makes perfect sense. I think there just naturally was going to be an adjustment period, right, with how Trey was going to be used in this offense and where his strengths and weaknesses are and what was best as far as how you're going to utilize those. And Coach Thompson, PJ Thompson, our offensive coordinator, and Coach Painter, and all those guys from a staff standpoint have had to kind of adjust and play with that as the years gone on. I think obviously they knew Trey from day one was going to be that focal point in the front court from an offensive standpoint as far as usage and things of that nature go. But it was just trying to figure out the right way to use him because he is a very good low post scorer. has a lot of skill on the block, but obviously he's not Zach Edey, right? So he's not going to be as efficient and that dominant the way Zach was because of Zach's sheer size and skill set. And so even though Trey can be effective scoring on the block, it's a little bit more matchup based, right? Depending on who's guarding him from game to game. And it's not as simple as it was with Zach, right? Zach basically was like, I don't care who's guarding him. Zach is going to have the advantage. And so you could, pretty much have that set scheme game to game. Whereas with Trey, I think it's a little bit more, okay, what type of team are we playing? How are they going to defend us? Where's Trey going to have the best matchup? And then Trey also is just a way different player than Zach as far as he's, more mobile than Zach. He's not quite as big. He has that ability to set ball screens with Braden Smith and in a different way than Zach did and play more out of that short role where he can be a facilitator. He can put the ball on the floor more than Zach can. When he gets that ball in the pocket right around that free throw line area, top of the key, he's such a difficult, problem for the defense to handle there because he can put the ball on the floor and attack the rim. He can score with those floaters in the mid-range, but he's also developed into becoming a really nice facilitator where if it's a 4-on-3 advantage, similar to like you see with Draymond Green with the Warriors all those years because all the attention Steph would get, Draymond's playing 4-on-3 and he can facilitate. Trey has been able to develop some of that too, and we've tried to put shooters around Braden and Trey, and it's really made us difficult to guard. And so it's been fascinating to see that just development as the season's gone on and how the staff has been able to weaponize Trey within the offense. And obviously Trey's playing at a really high level, and his versatilities makes us a tough team to handle.
It is Purdue tonight in Michigan. Big one in the Big Ten. 7 o'clock tip up at Chrysler Arena. Bobby Riddell will be on the radio call along with our friend Rob Blackman as he joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Bobby, safe travels on the way back from hopefully what is a victorious night for Purdue. We'll be listening. Appreciate the time today.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Yep, hopefully Rob and I have a victory to call tonight, but it should be a good one regardless.
Should be a good game, no question about it. Appreciate it, Bobby. Bobby Riddell joining us on the program. When we come back, Pacers thought they had a big man on the way in. Instead of that one, they do have one that's a new arrival, but it's not the one we anticipated. We'll explain, break it all down, and Scott Agnes joins us in 15. If you are joining the program today via the YouTube chat, we always appreciate that, by the way, in the break room, you might notice that I'm now wearing a coat. Now, I feel fine, so I know I'm not coming down with anything, but it's freezing in here. Now, Eddie can't notice it because he has natural insulation and 6 layers on. So I said, Eddie, is it me or is it chilly in here?
I'm starting to feel it.
Are you really?
Yeah, I'm feeling a little bit.
So it's not just me?
No.
Okay, good. I was getting a little worried there.
But then again, I love the cold, so I would prefer cold weather over the heat.
Like really cold?
What's really cold to you? I guess that's
I mean, if you were talking extremes, so the week that we have, like when the polar vortex rolls in and it's -5.
Oh, that's cold.
Would you rather have that than 100 with 80% humidity?
No. Ooh, that's a game changer. Man, I'm not sure. Just because that 80% humidity, I just feel like everything's sticking to me.
It's terrible. So I'll put this to you in a little story variation. Once upon a time, there was a team, the LA Lakers. The LA Lakers decided that they wanted to go after Luka Doncic, so they decided to trade their center, Anthony Davis. The Lakers then realized they needed a big man. They needed one that could protect the rim, and so they said, you know what? Let's see who's out there. And everybody that was a fan of the Indiana Pacers said, oh, my gosh, Miles Turner, he's been linked to the Lakers forever. The Lakers are going to throw the kitchen sink at the Pacers, and the Pacers are going to trade Miles Turner because Turner's contract's coming up. And everybody got nervous. And then the Lakers came out and said, you know, in making phone calls, it doesn't look like there's really a lot of centers available. And then bada boom, bada bing, they make a trade for Mark Williams of the Charlotte Hornets, who is a promising young I think a good floor running defensive center. And then Mark Williams shows up and he treats his physical like I did algebra and he flunks it. And so he goes back to Charlotte and the Lakers now all of a sudden are back into the business of wanting and needing a center. But there was rumor that Alex Len, who all of a sudden was available, was going to clear through waivers and the Pacers were going to be the team to sign him. But turns out that Alex Len, the Lakers, because they don't have Mark Williams, may be the ones signing Alex Len. And so as a result, the Pacers, because their center, the aforementioned Miles Turner, got concussed in their last outing and has yet to be cleared by league officials.
No, he didn't get concussed. He just had a neck sprain.
But he went into the concussion protocol, did he not?
He was checked out for the protocol, but he was never officially entered into the concussion protocol.
What did Rick Carlisle say this? Do we have the Rick Carlisle sound clip from this morning? He can add better clarification for that. Maybe I misunderstood it. Here's Rick Carlisle explaining the availability of Miles Turner.
You know, we're not sure what Miles Turner's status will be for tonight or tomorrow. He has not been ruled through the league protocols as having a concussion at this time. And he's made some gradual progress each day. And as I think I mentioned yesterday, after practice, we're not in a position to say that he will not play either tonight or tomorrow. That said, we're not in a position to say that he's going to play either.
Okay. He had not been declared to have a concussion. My apologies. I thought he was saying he had not been cleared through concussions. Either way, Miles Turner's availability in the short term is in question. And so the Pacers have done what at the beginning of the year, I remember asking the question and people were like, really, dude? He's not even on a 10-day, or not even on a 2-way contract. Jahlil Okafor, who is a former top 3 pick in the NBA, who has not played in the league regularly in 4 years, but has found his way back into trying to resurface himself in the NBA and has done so by signing at the beginning of the year with the Mad Ants, which is, of course, the G League team for Indiana. But he was not on a 2-way contract. Now, what does that mean, Jake? What that means is this. You can have a guy on a 2-way contract, meaning you can bring him back and forth. Johnny Furphy, for example, would be one of those that goes back and forth. But
Quentin Jackson,
Jackson is another one, yeah, Enrique Freeman. But Okafor was strictly on a Mad Ants contract, meaning that if Indiana wanted to bring him up, they had to make a roster spot available. That was available because they went ahead and made the trade to relinquished the rights to James Wiseman, who's out with the Achilles injury. So it is only a 10-day contract for Okafor. But in a 10-day contract, he is going to get the opportunity to show what he's going to do, and one would assume that's because, especially heading into the All-Star break, the Pacers, it would appear, are conditioning themselves or preparing themselves for not having Miles Turner in availability, and that Thomas Bryant would be the guy that gets that spot in the rotation, and then Okafor would be there to add insurance off the bench. I'm very curious to see how he plays, truth be told.
Yeah, because he doesn't typically shoot threes. He's never been a three-point shooter, and it sucks for Okafor because he was such a great talent at Duke coming out, and he is
kind of a mystery, right?
Yeah, I mean, he was a back-to-the-basket guy. He was an old traditional power forward center, and right after he got drafted, the game changed. I mean, he averaged almost 18 points per game as a rookie, and then the game changed, and he just started to slowly get phased out of the league because he doesn't shoot, and he's not like this great rebounder like Andre Drummond or Jalen Duren or any of those types. He was a guy that was back to the basket, get you 15, 20 points by doing that. And he was a good passer out of the post, but even with like Sabonis, he's not a three-point shooter, but he evolved to be somewhat capable.
You just brought up an interesting point about the way the game is played in the low post or players that typically would play that position. And it leads to one of my deepest thought questions about the NBA and the boulders in the stream of the way that we play today versus what we did, and whether or not there was one player that could have changed it all, but would he have? That's one of the questions I'm going to ask Scott Agnes when we preview the Pacers and Knicks next. Yeah, I wish I was hot-blooded right now. It's like 40 degrees in here.
No, Jake, you are hot-blooded because if you are more sensitive to the cold, that typically means you're warmer.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Your blood is warmer.
You're probably right.
Me, on the other hand, I'm cold-blooded.
Okay, that's right. I forgot. You're just an assassin over there, Eddie.
Hey, I can't reveal that.
Okay, here's my question about the NBA. I've asked it before, but I'm going to bring on Scott Agnes from Fieldhouse Files in just a second to have him elaborate on this question. And I don't know that we'll ever know the answer to this. But if you think about, for example, when we were talking to Isaiah Thomas and he was talking about Jonathan Bender and how you could foresee that positionless basketball was coming to the NBA. The other day I was in my gym, literally 2 weeks ago, and I round the corner and coming off one of the ellipticals or whatever is Greg Oden. And Greg Oden, at no fault of Greg Oden, his body just broke down on him. But Greg Oden was the biggest can't miss of can't miss products ever. And anybody that says, well, you know, Kevin Pritchard and the Blazers were morons because they passed on Kevin Durant to take Greg Oden. Every single general manager in the NBA was going to take Greg Oden number one. Guarantee it. Anybody that says they weren't is a liar. But what I want to know is this. When you look at the NBA today, and Greg Oden was a dominant, low-post, back-to-the-basket player, rim protector, that when he got the ball down low, had the spin move and the off-floor acceleration to finish around the rim. But he was a low-post, back-to-the-basket, on-the-block player. And it didn't take long before that player became a dinosaur in the NBA, for the most part. If Greg Oden had never gotten hurt and had stayed healthy, would we have seen that he would have been the outlier and his teams would have been the lone team trying to win with that style in an otherwise evolving game? Or would Greg Oden have been so dominant at that it would have delayed the transition into positionless basketball because teams would have been trying to counter what Portland was doing and winning with Greg Oden by themselves, going out and getting an Isaac Haas or whatever it might be that was a dominant low-post player, and Greg Oden would have kept the door open for centers behind him. I don't know that we'll ever know that answer, but I think about it a lot as to how much Greg Oden's injury and inability to be available changed and accelerated the rapid movement of positionless basketball in the NBA. Scott Agnes joining us now. Scott, I think you can grasp the concept of where I'm going there. What's your overall thought on which way it would have gone?
Yeah, that's a really fascinating question to consider, a great what if, and generally I'm against kind of those games, but this is a fun one, probably given our proximity to him and our understanding of his game before maybe he even hit that national spotlight. But I tend to go towards the latter, that teams, it would have held on to that era a little bit longer. I think Steph Curry really helped change things, obviously, more so starting around 2012. But when Oden got in the league, I think Shaq was in Miami at the time. I think ultimately Oden would have still had those injuries, and I only say that just because these bigs, we're just not built to be like that and to move like that. And so eventually I think a big's body would have broken down, just like we're seeing with Joel Embiid once again. And Larry Bird back in the day, even he was bigger for the time, and he had health issues and everything. But you look now to this last draft, Zach Edey doesn't go 9th if bigs were that prevalent anymore. He would have came out last year and been a top 2 pick, right?
One would think, right? I mean, absolutely. Like, the fact that, and then you wonder the other side of it, Scott, and that is if Zach Edey, who has played really well, and I think probably, would you agree that Zach Edey to this point has kind of exceeded expectation of what people thought at this point he'd be able to do?
I think so, yeah. I mean, we saw all his accolades in college, but there's so much conversation. Is it going to translate? Are we going to have a success? He's on a great Memphis team, and he's playing his role. He's fitting in nicely, playing 20 minutes a game.
So that leads me to wonder, will Edey be the guy that then, if he is successful and and he continues to progress, does that open the door back up again that had been closed a little bit after Oden? You see what I'm saying?
A little bit, except I think we've moved past that now. Just because, I mean, Edey can shoot three-pointers. I don't think Oden probably was ever adding that to his game. Even Joel can shoot three-pointers. And so the traditional big man, that's probably gone forever just because the versatility and the multidimensional ways that players now are they now know it's a possibility, right? When growing up, you think you're pigeonholed. You're a big, that means you guard the biggest player. That means you go to the post, you set picks, and you dunk it. Well, now that's not at all the case. I mean, Joel Embiid, I know he's a little bit of an exception here, but he's bringing the ball up, and even like a 6'7" Jarris Walker at forward brings the ball up. 15 years ago, you would have laughed at that, and a coach would have pulled him to the bench. No, you get it to the guard, and you move it. So I think this just speaks to the greater evolution of the game and the way in which players are no longer penciled in a specific position or a specific role.
Scott Agnes from Fieldhouse Files joins us on the Express Pro Tire Auto Guest Line. You have covered Mad Ants games. You have watched them this year. We've talked about this. You know, the contractual things that had to take place for former lottery pick Jahlil Okafor in his journey back to the NBA. It really is a cool story. I realize it's a 10-day contract, but with him signing a 10-day now with the Pacers, presumably to get them to the All-Star break if Miles Turner has limited availability. Number one, I'll begin with this. Do you believe this will be more than a 10-day deal?
I do not. That's not my initial expectation here. I think it's more of we need someone to, as you said, get to the All-Star break. We like to reward one of our own. It does give us a chance to know for sure whether you can go back up to the NBA. He's been out of the league, the true NBA, since 2021, and since that 2 years ago had an Achilles injury. So I think there are a lot of questions, Jake, and most of them hinge defensively and on his mobility.
Okay, then the second question is, what have you seen from him? When you've seen him, what have you seen from him that either A, forecasts, why they would go ahead and give him the shot, or B, what have you seen from him that's lacking that has caused him to not work his way yet back into the NBA?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just like it looks like it's a pain. He's trudging down the floor. That'd be the reason. In playing with this modern big, like, can he get out beyond the free throw line and defend and then switch and these all switching lineups and those sorts of things? Those are the red flags to me. The green flags is he can still score. He can still battle in the post offensively. He still rebounds well, and the Pacers have not been rebounding as well as they were several weeks ago. So that could be an additive. And, of course, he has the experience factor. He's been in the league 10 years. The thing I always marvel at here, Jake, is he was a top pick by the 76ers. This was kind of near the start of the process. At that same time, TJ McConnell went undrafted to the 76ers. Now, since then, McConnell signed about 3 or 4 extensions with the Pacers, and Okafor is just trying to find his footing and kind of trying to get back into the league by the time he's 30 here.
The process, by the way. Can you imagine? Philly's process ultimately was to get what Joel Embiid. I'm trying to think of, was it Embiid? Is that what they ended up with as the big prize of the process?
Ultimately, yes. But I don't know how you cannot conclude that was a failure, because guess what? You haven't won a title. So, yes, you've gotten a star. You've moved on from several players. It can't be a success. You haven't won.
No, I totally agree. And listen, Scott, it's interesting. The Embiid, and I know we're going to talk Pacers next here, but Embiid's a wonderful talent, no question. But we've got to be entering towards the end of the tunnel there, right? Just because of the health or lack thereof. At some point, you got to kind of pull the plug on it, don't you?
I think so. I've never been a believer in this 76ers team, and I preface that by saying I think I would have moved on from him a couple years ago. No, when you are his team, you know him, his medical history, and all that stuff better than anyone. You sell high and restart this whole thing, knowing, all right, the process didn't work. We got Embiid, but guess what? We're going to get all this in return for him. Now, he's really very much like Kawhi Leonard, like an all-NBA elite talent, a Hall of Famer, but you never know his availability, and that is just so painful from a team standpoint that's just trying to become a contender again. You make all these moves. You give Paul George a max contract. He's the only player, Jake, left in his draft class from 2010. That changed after Gordon Hayward retired this past year. So you got to give him credit for the longevity and continuing to get the max deal. On the other side, though, you're like, Philly, what are you doing? Giving max money to PG. His own team, the Clippers, didn't want to go up to 4 years. Why are you willing to do so? Reeks of desperation there a little bit.
Scott, when you look at the standings right now as the Pacers get ready, and I heard Kevin say this morning when he had Rick Carlisle on, he's right. We think of the All-Star break as like, okay, you've reached the halfway point of the year. Well, really, it's like the 65% mark of the year. But Indiana going into it right now, 4.5 behind tonight's opponent in New York. The Knicks, and I have not paid week-by-week attention to the Knicks. The Pacers, it feels like their record is a little bit misleading because they had so many injuries in the beginning of the year, and now that they are together as a unit, pretty solid, right? New York, on the other hand, has New York had a lot of adversity, or have they been at ceiling from the get-go?
I think the thing with them is they've had several players, Jake, that have battled injuries, including like OG Anunoby right now, Towns, and several other guys. So I think they've had some rocky parts in their season, and they made that big trade at the beginning of the season. So there's that learning curve versus the Pacers. They pride themselves in having that continuity coming back from this past year.
Scott Agnes joining us. Fieldhouse Files, by the way, is where you can see all of his work. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Scott, going into this one tonight with New York, Towns gives them a different look, obviously, over the course of the year from what we saw in the playoffs last year. But biggest storyline that you're most intrigued by in this matchup tonight?
For me, it's can the Pacers – I always go back to this because it's their biggest weakness. Can the Pacers contain their big wings? That's their biggest issue. And so you got Mikal Bridges, who was added. You got Josh Hart, who gave them fits. Jalen Brunson seemingly always goes for 40 against him. Now he's a smaller guard. But to me, it goes back to that defensive factor. Now in the micro picture here, it's how do they start the game? Because it was atrocious over that road trip. They were outscored essentially going into the second quarter down 20 in all those games. And against good teams like the Knicks are, who are on a contending roster, you're not going to be able to claw your way back from that. You can't. And so it's defending those wings and getting back to playing a full 48-minute game is what I'm watching closely.
Scott, did you watch a lot of Price is Right growing up?
I did, absolutely.
Do you like that Drew Carey on it? He's and I like Drew Carey a great deal, but I don't like him on that show. Your thoughts?
It's one of those that it's hard to follow the guy.
Correct.
And so whomever they put in that position, it's going to feel flawed and not
seems
right.
Bored. Drew Carey seems bored on there.
Congratulations.
I can't remember the last time I've watched
showcases.
it, though.
That's the problem, Scott. Like, you're not staying home sick from school anymore, right? I mean, that was always the treat.
I got a fun fact, Jake, that you would appreciate.
Okay.
Never missed one day of school.
Really? Like from kindergarten all the way through?
Yeah, absolutely.
You
Not
knew who
one.
else? Okay, you have something in common with a North Central. We both went to North Central. That's why I mentioned that. One of my classmates who also did radio, as did you. Do you know who it is? Got like a plaque.
I feel like the only guy I feel like you overlapped with that I'm aware of is Adam Alexander.
Correct. Adam was my class, and he got a plaque at the end at the end of the year for never missing it. Never once missed a day of school. That's impressive. Now, did you ever have? Be honest about this. In your senior year, like, were there days when you weren't feeling well and you're like, "No, man, I got to go. Like, I'm going because to keep the streak alive."
No, that was just my expectation. Like, fortunately, I was never badly sick.
Well, that's what I mean. Like, you never got like the flu. I mean, your mom never, or
You just had head colds, those type of things. That was it. Nothing serious, and I'm always one that I feel like if
all
I'm
the time
not
in college just to make up for it.
No, because then I'd always feel behind. So it really set a precedent, I think. Wow. Yeah. No, in college it was always more painful, Jake, for me to miss class then because I'd be curious, what did I miss? Is this going to be mentioned on a test? It'd be the panic section from not being there and getting the info.
Do you still have the dream? I mean, I do. Do you still have the dream that, like, it's the last week of class and you haven't been to class the whole semester and you're getting ready to take the final and you're like, man, I am totally hosed here?
It's funny. I was just tweeting about this today. I think Ryan Glasspiegel of Front Office Sports was posting about that. Or the exam, I've never had that. Not once.
You've never had, like, the fear of – Eddie, what about you?
Yeah, definitely.
But did you skip college class a lot, Eddie?
No.
I don't believe that. You strike me as a guy that sat around watching Jenny Jones all day.
Nope.
Okay. All right,
it's funny, Jake, though. You're right. A lot of people have had that. I've just
like
never experienced it.
So we're going Price is Right rules. That's why I asked about the Price is Right on this game right here, Scott. You ready?
Yeah,
Closest
if only I got a grilled cheese
over.
with it, too.
That's right. Closest without going over. Eddie, I'll let you guess as well. Paul George's career earnings heading into this season. Eddie, your guess. No looking it up, Scott, while Eddie's sitting here apparently.
600
I have my
mil.
number.
How much?
600 million.
$1. Eddie, come on, you're better than that.
I know.
All right, we're going to take two on this. Ready?
300.
Oh, man.
Eddie, what is your guess?
300.
300 million. All right, Scott Agnes, your guess?
200 million.
Eddie Garrison, the second time around, $307,864,000.
I was talking about interest over the years, too.
Man, that's
And
impressive.
endorsements.
Now that does
So my
not-
real guess
no,
was
I take that
250,
back.
but I went a little low there just for the Price is Right rules. But Andy just signed a max deal, Jake.
So,
Factor
he's
that
at-
in.
He'll be at 356 at the end of this year. Unbelievable. And wow, he is still owed. This is
Yes.
incredible. $307 million heading into this year, and Paul George is still owed $210 million. So he will have made over $500 million in his NBA career.
Yeah, I was close.
Can you imagine?
You laughed at me for that 600 million.
How many trade deadline deals is Paul George going to be a part of in 27 and 28 when he's owed $54 and $56 million? And he'll be how old at that point? Unbelievable.
Yeah, getting paid through 39, I want to say. Man. That was a fantastic pick by the Pacers at 10. I'll never forget the reaction inside what was then Bankers Life Fieldhouse, and everybody was just like, who?
Oh, totally.
Who is this? I don't know who this is.
Totally.
Because he played on the West Coast, Palmdale, and Gordon Hayward had just went the pick before.
It was like, they picked a guy with two first names. That never works out. And I remember talking with Kevin Lee in the Colts locker room, and we were talking about Paul George, and it was probably his second year or third year in. And we're like, yeah, you know what? Like, he's just a guy. He's just a guy. And then they were in Portland. We just talked about this the other day when the Pacers were in Portland, and Paul George had, like, kind of a breakout game. And all of a sudden, like, people were tweeting about it, like, whoa, like, this dude just blew up, and then it was off and running. And you could see it come together. And you know what, Scott? And you might disagree with me on this. I'll be interested in your perspective. I actually, for all of the grief that he took here and the way he probably did mishandle his departure, all told, I've always actually thought he was a pretty nice guy.
He absolutely was. He was very accommodating with interviews. Now, he did change towards his final couple of years in Indy. We saw that with Victor Oladipo as well. I've always said that Paul's my biggest knock against him is that he wanted to be liked way too much.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
To that point, he always wanted to say what fans and such wanted to hear rather than sharing his true opinion. And I think that got him into trouble until the very end here when sitting in the I think it was the right baseline, the clubhouse there at the Indian Stadium at the charity baseball. He was talking about, I want to be a Pacer. You know, I'm under contract here. And then I think it was like 2 days later, the Pacers were informed that he wants to move on here. And so it goes back to the message you convey needs to be authentic or just don't say anything at all.
Hey, Jake, I also never missed a day of school. From kindergarten through 12th grade, I got plaques at Sugar Grove, Woodrow Wilson, and Terre Haute South High School. Then when I graduated, they gave me an iPad and a $1,200 scholarship. Now, what did you get, Scott?
Nada. Nothing.
Hey, Jake, I think Scott
That's
Agnes is
disappointing.
actually an alien. That's possible, too. Is that why you never were sick? Are you an alien?
No, I wish. I actually had some flu that I've never had before this past weekend. Unreal. But I'm good now.
No, which one was it? The bird flu? Isn't that the bird flu
I don't know,
going
man.
around? There's like some really bad, like 2 to 3 day flu. Is that what you had?
Yeah, about a 3-day flu, I would say.
How'd you knock it out? What'd you take? What'd you do?
I actually rested for once. I'm also always a good water drinker, so that was no big deal. But I just hit. I don't think this did anything because it was flu versus head cold. But I did the emergency, the Zicam, and ibuprofen.
Now, you were over in Europe though, right?
Yeah, a couple weeks ago.
I wonder if you get the bird flu over there. I'm telling you, this bird flu is going around. Stay away from birds.
I've heard that from those with kids especially. It seems like they've been sick for months now.
Stay away from birds, I'm telling you. All right, Scott, tonight, Pacers Knicks, 7:30 tip. Not a 7 o'clock, but a 7:30 tip. All the coverage on Fieldhouse Files. Scott, appreciate it. Go take some Zicam. That's impressive, not missing a day of school. Now, Eddie, let me ask you this. What % of the classes that you took at Indy did you skip? Did you blow off?
Not many. So I would say probably 5%.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The biggest problem at Bloomington when I was at IU was...
Well, hold on. Let me ask you this then.
On super cold days, it was always hard. It was tough to go to class because there was nowhere to park, and you had to take the bus. And I lived way off campus, so taking the bus in and then walking to campus, and if it was like 5 degrees out, you're like, I don't know, man.
Let me ask you this. So in college, I was the sports director for UIndy's radio station, WICR, and a part of our coverage of the station
They
is
play
that
classical music, don't they?
classical from midnight to noon, and then jazz from noon to midnight.
Okay. When does the sports work in?
Whenever there's
if you were the sports director at the station,
so
it's classical and jazz only.
We'd have newscasts at 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, and there'd be a 1-minute sportscast every Monday through Friday within the newscast.
Okay.
So we would do that, and then do all of the football games, home and road, basketball,
Did
boys
you have
and,
a fun
men
little
and
thing you
women.
do like, hey, it's Eddie on the sports on the 10s, that kind of thing?
No, never.
Okay.
Would never. Anyway, I asked you about the skipping a class portion of this.
Back with Duke Ellington in a second, but last night Duke, by the way, lost 75-63.
I would have to travel on the road with the men's and women's team.
Okay.
Does that count as skipping class, or are you talking about just straight up not showing?
No, but I have a friend. No, that's not skipping because you were doing a university.
So yeah,
I have a friend that took Spanish at IU our freshman year, and Alan Henderson was in his class. And Alan Henderson, of course, was like, back then it was really unique that players started right away. And so they had like some big exam, and Alan Henderson wasn't there because Indiana had a game like at Iowa. And so they come back, and the professor, the teacher's like, well, you failed the test. You weren't here. And Alan Henderson's like, I wasn't here because I was on the road for basketball. She's like, I don't, that doesn't count. I don't care. Like you cut class. And he's like,
Yep.
I didn't cut class. I play basketball for the university. She had no idea who he was. And like, he was like looking around at everybody else in the class, like, somebody back me up here. And and it was rare that a freshman started. So the fact that he was playing, people are like, yeah, lady, like, how do you not know that he plays? But no, that absolutely counts. Now, I will tell you this, speaking of the bird flu, and I'm not making light of that, but my roommate in college signed up. Do you remember when you would have classes that were just an 8-week course as opposed to the whole semester?
No, never had those.
Okay, so you would get like whatever, like, man, I've got an 8-week course, but it's 3 credit hours or 4 credit hours, but it was super intense, right? It was like, you went like 4 hours per class or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So my roommate comes home one day and is ecstatic, and he's just as proud as can be because he signed up for an 8-week course that was 4 credit hours, and it was bird watching. And he's like, look at this. It's ridiculous. I literally go for 8 weeks. I go on Thursday nights from like 6 to 8 p.m., and that's it. And it's 4 credit hours. Easy A, greatest thing ever. And we're like, man. Well, after the 8 weeks of the lectures, then the professor's like, now it comes time for our field trip session. And like, what are you talking about? The second half of the semester, every single Saturday, they had to meet at 8 o'clock and then drive to different sanctuaries around the state of Indiana and watch birds until like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think Henderson was in that class with him as well. And he said one time they were coming back and they stopped at a McDonald's in Jasper, and somebody noticed that an IU basketball player was there and, like, made a phone call, and then the whole town showed up to get autographs and pictures, and they were there delayed for another 45 minutes, and people were like, we've been watching birds for 4 hours. Can we please get out of here? So the 8-hour class didn't pay off for him. But, no, you were – if you were now, did you travel by bus, plane? What did you take?
Bus, yeah. Plane once for football, and that's because we had to go to Arkansas for a postseason game.
Where in Arkansas?
You
tell me the town, and I'll guess the school. Tell me the town, and then on the other side, I'll tell you the school.
I got to remember the town first.
Look up the town, and I'm going to tell you the school, and you're going to be amazed. You're going to be amazed. Eddie's looking this up.
Arkadelphia.
Arkadelphia.
Yeah.
Okay. Home of the Eagles, right? They greased the light poles last night because they're expecting people to be climbing up and down them. 1 million are expected. All right, I'll tell you what school's in Arkadelphia on the other side. So there's a college or a university in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, correct?
Yep.
Now, let me ask you this. Is this a public university?
No.
Is it a state university?
Private.
Boy, that's tough. Obviously, Arkansas Pine Bluff is in Pine Bluff.
And they're Division I.
The University of Arkansas is in Fayetteville, right?
Reminder, it's Division II
Okay.
we're talking about here.
The Arkansas State University is in Jonesboro, Arkansas. Do you hear a humming noise?
Yes. It's like a vacuum's running.
Yeah. That was very odd. Give me the first letter of this school, Eddie.
Oh,
And is this a university or a college?
university.
Well, that's tough. Have I heard of it? Obviously not. Go ahead
I
and
have
hit,
no
go ahead and
idea.
hit me with it because the show's over at 3.
Washita Baptist.
Excuse me?
Washita.
You said it started with an O.
Uh-huh. Ouachita. Wachita Baptist.
One more time.
Ouachita. Wachita Baptist University.
Better known as Obu to the people who go to school there, right?
I have no idea.
What year are you at Obu?
It was weird because their campus, I forget the other college. There's
They got
another
a Liberty Bell there in Arkadelphia?
I don't know, but there's a college that it's literally right across the street, and they share dorms,
Well, that's kind of cool.
and they are big rivals in sports. Obviously,
Who's the other school?
I just told you I don't know. I can't remember.
Okay. All right, fair enough. Tonight, a couple of big ones in college basketball, none of them involving Wachita Baptist University, but the Boilers in Ann Arbor to take on Michigan, and I think it's a big one, especially when you look at the bigs for Michigan. If I were to tell you, or if we were to say back in, say, October, that just shy of Valentine's Day there would be a game involving Purdue and Michigan that would be right towards the top of the Big Ten standings, which of those two schools would more surprise you to know that they are in that situation? Probably Michigan, right? Based on where they were a year ago and what Dusty May's done. But they rely on a couple of bigs in order to do what they do. And I thought, for example, and you're curious, or I'm curious, how much Matt Painter will look at what Indiana was able to do. Because and I know that you don't just go off the last performance for a team. I mean, you obviously go and look at it in totality of the season and scouting a team. But Michigan seemed a little off kilter when Indiana went to a zone and kind of pushed them out and kept the ball away from their bigs. And I'll be curious if Purdue does that strategy against them. It would make perfect sense to do it that way and to try it that way. But then again, you also defensively, I mean, how much do you want to throw at in the backcourt Michigan in terms of Purdue? Because you want Braden Smith, obviously, on the offensive end to be, I hate to say to save things for the offensive end, but I just think Smith is so important to what they do. Obviously, that goes without saying, in terms of getting his own shot. But I think he's as good as any point guard in knowing when to go and when to fall back and distribute. And then you have Trey Kaufman-Wren, who has been their bread and butter on the low block area. But they've got two bigs that are going to be guarding him. Caleb First is going to be important. And, C.J. Cox is going to be important. Lawyer. You've got to go – you've got to be able to kind of spread things out a little bit, I think. And then Indiana going up against Michigan State. And again, for Indiana, I mean, would we be talking about Indiana if it wasn't for the fact that there are so many people that still follow Indiana, if that makes sense? I mean, the year is circling the drain for them. Now, I mentioned earlier, Eddie, and I want your thoughts on this.
Okay.
And we'll talk plenty about this between now and whenever they have an announcement of who they're going to hire, so to speak. But for me, when I look at the Indiana coaching search, Brad Stevens is phone call number 1, 2, and 3. We know this.
And 4, 5, and 6.
Correct. We know that he has allegedly in the past turned down a 5-year deal at $50 million. I think somebody said he's making around 11 for the Celtics. Indiana's got the money. They do. And then it becomes a matter of whether or not Stevens wants to come back and coach in the NIL era, and whether or not that itch that has been with him for a long time, supposedly, of growing up in if you grew up in Indiana, you probably dreamed of, especially if you grew up in Bob Knight's Indiana, you dreamed, if you were a basketball guy, of someday being in that position. But it's a different job than it once was. Everything's different. But Indiana still, in terms of NIL, collectives, there's facilities, fan base, there's a lot going for it. Now, there's some that goes against it, including the fan base. I hate to say that, but it's true. There are a lot of people that would not want to get involved now in that. And so for that reason, you have to find somebody, and this is where I think the list of names gets whittled a little bit. There is so much scrutiny of the Indiana basketball program. And there is so much in terms of the fan base that feels an entitlement or a part ownership of the program, especially now with NIL and people giving in money and raising money for collectives and doing things like that. There are a lot of coaches that you've got to be able to stand up for yourself a little bit. And some coaches might not be able to do that. I don't know that Indiana is a job where a guy when Bob Knight went to Indiana in 1972, he was still relatively unproven. People are like, who's the guy from Army? And we're the Hurrying Hoosiers, Branch McCracken. I mean, Lou Watson, for 4 years, man, he almost ruined this program. We need a guy that's going to get us back running, scoring points. Who's this guy from Army? And he's like a drill sergeant. But Bob Knight had a big enough personality to just say, no, this is how I'm going to do it. So you need a coach that has that big a personality and just that demeanor about them and that self-assuredness to be able to handle that. Because while the fan culture at Indiana can be a blessing because it means that you have this huge following behind you, there can be a level of toxicity with it as well if it goes the other way. Ask Tom Crean. Ask Archie Miller. Ask Mike Davis. Ask Mike Woodson. So when you look at the list, Stevens gets calls 1, 2, and 3. You make him say no. And then, admittedly, Dusty May is going to be the next person they call. I can tell you. After that, then you have a list of names that are probably, as we talked about yesterday with Jeff Rabjohns, it's available on the podcast center on 1075thefan.com. The next list of names that you look at, you have to factor in everything I just talked about. And each name that's up there, there are a lot of positives and there's some drawback. You know, if you look at, for example, Ben McCollum, who I've talked about from Drake, very impressive guy for sure, and kind of has a Kurt Signetti type feel. But at the same time, doesn't have exactly what I was talking about in terms of like he would still be kind of proving himself on the job, if you will, or proving himself to the fan base. And the second things go bad, you know, and you don't know for certain that he's the guy. You don't know whether or not he is a long-term guy or not, and whether he can win big time. Grant McCaslin at Texas Tech, I'm told very sharp, young, like very sharp, good coach, younger guy, relatively speaking. I think he's like mid-40s, 46, something like that, 48. But never been out of the state of Texas. Coached almost, I think spent a year outside of Texas. Lifer in Texas. Lifer in Texas. Is he going to want to leave Texas Tech?
He's 48.
Okay. Shaka Smart. Really good coach. And I love what he's done. But would he want to leave Marquette, number one? And number two, what happened at Texas? Big-time job, big expectations, big conference. Did okay, but not like knock your socks off. And a lot of people talking about Steve Alford, and I get it. But at this point, Alford, and I think he did a great job at New Mexico, and he was good at UCLA, but he never got UCLA over the hump at a place where every coach around him had been to Final Fours at UCLA, and Alford was never able to get there. I love Steve Alford. Love him more than anything. I mean, he was my first ever, like anything in sport in the first 20 years of my life, nothing was I more passionate about than Steve Alford. And I still like him as a guy and all of it. But again, I mean, that definitely feels like, really? I mean, he's okay. I think he's a Honda Accord. This has to be a Rolls Royce. It has to be a Lexus. Scott Dolson knows that. And when it comes down to it, the guy that I just keep going back to in my mind, because he's at UCLA where he's been in the Midwest and he's won, and he's kind of hard-nosed. He's not going to win the press conference. He's not overly sexy, and I think there are a lot of people that would be like, really? That? But Mick Cronin is the one that it seems like is the hardest to continually check off the list and dispatch, because then you kind of come back to it, because he's won, he's been to a Final Four, he's at a big-time program where he doesn't seem happy at UCLA. He seems like a disciplined guy. There are a lot of things that he's the one that I keep going back to of if literally he might be like your sixth option. But if he's option 6 and that's who you go with, I think people would be like, okay. But if it's option 6 and you go with Alford, then it looks like, really? They had to settle. Cronin doesn't look like a had to settle guy, right?
Yeah, and the name you didn't mention in there is Chris Beard. I mean, he's got the background of, some baggage that with him. But, additionally, you were talking about the Texas Tech coach, Grant McCaslin, being primarily in Texas. Same thing can be said about Chris Beard. He's left the state of Texas to coach only 3 times.
And here's the thing about Beard.
And
Eddie,
he's been coaching since 1991.
I want to be clear on this. I don't know Chris Beard, and I think he's a heck of a basketball coach, clearly. I mean, he might be the best X's and O's coach in college basketball, and a workaholic, and a nose-to-the-grind guy. And I'm just going by what I've been told. But what I've been told is the problem with Chris Beard is the further you look into Chris Beard, the more you uncover. And that the personal life of Chris Beard, and I don't mean this as a knock on his character, but there are reports that the personal life of Chris Beard is just such that it leads you to believe that you could be taking a chance and taking a risk. And this has to be a hire where Indiana cannot take a risk and cannot take a chance. And I think they know that. And like Jeff said yesterday, Michigan didn't give Chris Beard a look. Louisville didn't give Chris Beard a look. You have to wonder why, with as good as he's been and as impressive as he's been, and you look at Texas, and I know that charges were dropped against him, but what cost him his job in Texas is bad enough, and my understanding is may not be isolated. seen it with Andrew Luck going back to Stanford and other places. Bill Belichick hiring one at North Carolina. And North Carolina, speaking of that, you want to talk about alums coaching at their alma mater and running into uncomfortable situations. That is certainly the case with Hubert Davis at North Carolina. And you were mentioning something that may become the trend now in Division I college basketball, the hiring of a general manager, right?
Yeah, last night I was watching a little bit of Clemson in North Carolina, and they were talking about just like the future of Hubert Davis, and it sounds like that Hubert Davis is going to be safe for another year because they're going to try and reinvent the wheel and adapt to how college athletics is trending towards of, having general managers for football and men's basketball just because of the amount of time it takes for coaches now.
It's a salary cap issue as much as anything, right?
That too, with your NIL budget and whatever. And plus, I can't remember who the player is, but there was a transfer this past, portal cycle in football that agreed to a 2-year contract with a college to be their quarterback for the next 2 seasons. And I'm just wondering if that's going to start to becoming the norm across college athletics because of all the factors of NIL and, kids wanting to secure, young adults wanting to secure as much money as they can. And some of these programs trying not to constantly have to rebuild through the portal, rebuild through NIL. Do we start seeing more players and student athletes sign these, hey, I'll be here for 2 years for $8 million like you do in professional sports?
Yes.
And so that leads me to wonder, is IU going to start adapting that with basketball now that they have another head coaching gig open to help alleviate some of the pressures off that next coach to just be able to focus on coaching and recruiting versus having to worry about NIL and all of these other stuff that falls on their plate now?
A major challenge for universities with this transfer portal era is, quite frankly, and I know it sounds crazy because for a lot of the players that are playing, understandably, it's a business for them. And you have two kinds of players. You got the player that's going to go and get the most money before they go play professionally somewhere. And you get the player that is in college to get a degree, and athletics is the means for which they can do that without having to pay for a tuition. Now, for the latter group, then you have the challenge of college credit transfers. Now, I can tell you, so I started my college career at the University of Kansas, then went to Indiana, transferred to Indiana, and spent the majority of my time at Indiana. When I decided that I wanted to go back and finish my degree, I initially reached out to the University of Kansas to ask them or to apply there to see if I could finish at Kansas and get my degree from Kansas because it was symbolic to me because that's where I started. And I wanted to be able to say that I was finishing what I started, and I started there. And when I reached out to Kansas, they wrote back and said, one of the issues here is in order to graduate with a degree from the University of Kansas, you have to have, I think it was 70% of your credit hours had to have been accumulated at the University of Kansas. And I had like 110 hours or whatever at that point, 100 of which were accumulated at Indiana. So if you are a transfer portal student, what these schools are going to have to, and they are already starting to contend with, there are academic standards, and you want the degree to mean something at a Vanderbilt, at a Stanford, at a North Carolina, at a Duke, at a Michigan, some of the elite academic institutions, Virginia. So if you have some player that has accumulated 105, 110 credit hours at, what's the name of the school again? In
Ouachita Baptist?
At Ouachita Baptist, that may be a fine school. I have no idea.
Arkadelphia, Arkansas?
But at a school that does not have the same selectivity, the same prestige as an upper school like that, how do you say to that kid, yeah, we're going to take you on here because we want you as a basketball player, but you now go from being in the classroom a senior to a sophomore? Well, nobody's going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So these schools then have to look at, well, wait a minute, what do we do here in terms of that regard and how we handle it? And schools are already also having to wade through that. And then you get the challenge of the athletic department and the coaches saying, no, we need this guy on a roster because he's a great player. Well, we understand that, but at the same time, like, we're not just handing out degrees to anybody because we want our degrees to be of value. That sounds ridiculous, but that's another thing that comes into play. In play tonight, Indiana and Michigan State, Purdue and Michigan, the big one in the Big Ten. It is the Pacers and the New York Knicks. And John's going to have it all covered for you leading up to it at 6 o'clock. He's at Tom's Watch Bar right on Illinois, where I was for just before the Billy Joel concert on Saturday night. It was absolutely packed in there. Cold beer, plenty of great hors d'oeuvres and dishes, and Diet Coke's perfectly sufficient. John's there. He'll be there with you until 6, and we will talk with you at noon tomorrow. I thank you for listening to Query and Company.